Welcome to Test All Things. Test All Things is an outreach of Tower to Truth Ministries, and I'm your host, Fran Sankey. You can find us on the web at tower2truth.net. Test All Things is a Bible discernment, evangelistic program dedicated to creating an awareness of and biblical answers to false religious teachings opposing Christianity today. Today we'll be discussing a hot new trend in the Christian church. Perhaps you've heard of places like Solomon's Porch, Circle of Hope, or the Ooze.com. Well, if names like this have been keeping you up all night wondering what it's all about, well, you're going to find out today. The topic today is the Emergent church movement. The Emergent church seems to be a growing trend among evangelicals today and looks like it's influencing lots and lots of people. To talk about this, I have a special guest who was part of the Emergent movement, and he'll be helping us to get a grip on what this hot movement is all about. His name is Jason Carlson, and if you want to find him, you can find him at his website, that is jude3.com. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, thanks, Fran. It's great to be with you today.
Awesome. Jason, the Emergent Church, just very briefly, if you can do it, and then we'll get into it a little bit more. What is the Emergent Church, and about when did it begin?
Yeah, basically, there's the Emergent Church, sometimes called the Emerging Church, really is a movement that started out with the goal of reaching the postmodern culture for Jesus Christ with the message of Christianity, and so you'll often hear people refer to this movement as the Emerging Church, the Emergent Church. There's some differences there that are probably important to talk about, but basically what it is it's a goal of reaching the postmodern world with the message of Christianity.
Fair enough. Now, the big question, what is postmodernism?
Well, postmodernism is really I describe it as a cultural movement or ethos. And basically, to understand postmodernism and what it is, you really have to have a brief history lesson. Postmodernism is really a reaction, a critical reaction to a period of history known as modernity. Modernity was the period of history that basically ruled the Western world for roughly the last 500 years. And modernity sprung out of a period of human history called the Enlightenment. And basically, the goal of modernity was basically the idea that human beings, without any appeal to the supernatural world, without any appeal to the church, to God, the divine, human beings through their own reason, through their own rational mental faculties could discover all truth. And through our own human potential, we could really create almost a utopian kind of paradise here on Earth. And basically what has happened in about the last 50 years as this postmodern movement has arisen is basically postmodern critics of modernity have looked at this modern project of trying to create a perfect world through human reason alone, through human potential. And postmodernist critics point out all of the failures of the modern period. 2 world wars, a Great Depression, a nuclear arms race, environmental catastrophes, the subjugation of minority cultures around the world. And so postmodernist critics look at these results of the modern period and they say, if this is where modernity leads, then who needs it? And so postmodernity is really a reactionary critique of the modern world, and it brings in a lot of different philosophical issues with it. One of the key ones would be probably the denial of absolute truth, which is really, for people who are concerned with postmodernity, probably the number one concern with this postmodern movement is their handling of truth. So that's just some brief background on postmodernism. But this is the culture that the Emergent Church is trying to reach with the message of Jesus Christ.
Is there any handle on how big this movement is, how many churches they have, or how many attendees?
Well, it's really at this point, it's really a worldwide movement. There are churches literally in countries all over the world that would identify themselves as emerging churches. By and large, however, it is predominantly a Western phenomenon. You find emerging churches mostly in Western Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, but primarily it's a Western Christian phenomenon, and that's by and large, mostly due to the realities that the influence of postmodern philosophy and postmodern thought was really, in many ways, limited to the Western world. But there are probably, in America here today, probably thousands of churches that would identify themselves as being part of this emergent church movement.
Okay, that's fairly big then.
It's fairly big, yeah.
Yeah, if you just joined us, I am interviewing Jason Carlson. The topic is the Emergent or the Emerging Church. You can contact Jason at jude3.com. Jason, is the Emergent Church just a different way of doing church and a new way of trying to reach the postmodern people with the age-old gospel, or is there more to it?
Well, honestly, Fran, it really depends on who you talk to within this movement. There's basically two distinctions that you need to make when you're talking about the emergent or the emerging church. The emerging church tends to be a label that is used for churches that are simply trying to missionally reach out to the postmodern culture, the postmodern world. So within churches who would call themselves emerging churches, there are many solid Bible-believing churches, Orthodox Christian churches, that are simply trying to reach the postmodern world with the message of the gospel. And this isn't really an area of concern for me. I mean, we have been called biblically to take the message of the gospel to all people, into all places, and all cultures. Now, what does concern me, however, is under this banner of the emerging church, there is a specific element, a specific group within the emerging church called the Emergent church movement. This is the group that would align themselves with an organization known as Emergent. Their website is Emergent Village, and this is the group that would associate with people like Brian McLaren, Tony Jones, Doug Padgett, and others. And this is really the group within the emerging church that a lot of people are concerned about, because mostly a lot of conservative evangelical Christians believe that this group really is more interested in theological revisionism and has really embraced a lot of theologically liberal ideas, in our opinion, which we believe take people away from a true biblical position on a variety of these important topics.
Now, you yourself, you were involved in this movement for a while. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I was close friends with one of the key leaders of the Emergent Church movement. I still am today. A good friend of mine, Doug Padgett. He's one of the key players in the Emergent Church. He's the pastor of Solomon's Porch here in Minneapolis. And Doug and I are close friends. He was my youth pastor in high school. Still consider him a very close friend to this day. But because of my relationship with him back when I was in seminary about eight years ago or so, Doug kind of invited me into this movement at a very early stage of this movement, and I was one of the original members of his church, Solomon's Porch. And because of my friendship with him, I was able to meet and spend a lot of time with some of the key players of the Emergent Church, Brian McLaren, Tony Jones, a whole variety of key names within the movement. So I was really able to get a real insider's view of who these people are and what their goals are for the Christian church. And basically, all of these people involved in the Emergent Church are really good people. But I just came to find that where they were taking the church theologically was just, in my opinion, not a good place. It was, in my opinion, straying from biblical Orthodox Christianity, and so there just came a point for me where I just felt I had to remove myself from participation in this movement, even though I would still consider myself friendly with many people within the movement today.
If you just tuned in, I'm interviewing Jason Carlson, and the topic is the Emergent or the Emerging Church. You can find Jason on the web at jude3.com. Brian McLaren, he states that Emergent is a, quote, conversation. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's probably the number one way that the Emergent Church refers to itself, as they call themselves a conversation. And basically what that implies is that within the Emergent Church, there is no official denominational affiliation. In fact, people from a wide variety of Christian denominations would consider themselves aligned with the Emergent Church movement. And so they simply describe themselves as a conversation. Now, in one regard, I kind of view that term as a little bit disingenuous, as really when you read these guys, they really are trying to bring a new reformation to the Christian church. And so there is a little more formality to their movement than I think they like to give themselves credit for. But there really is no official denominational ties. It is definitely a multi-denominational movement.
How does the Emergent Church feel towards conservative evangelicals and fundamentalists in general?
Well, my experience has been both personally and just in the process of interacting with the literature and the websites, the blogs that come out of the Emergent Church. I've just come to find a general sense of almost like a cynicism towards conservative evangelicalism and fundamentalism. There's very little positive talk about conservative evangelicals or fundamentalists. Lots of jokes that go around within the Emergent church circles. And, and it's very interesting to me because what I found in my time involved with the Emergent Church conversation is that they describe themselves as a conversation. They claim to want to embrace and listen to people from all theological backgrounds, but when you come into this conversation with a conservative bent or a conservative evangelical leaning, you are very quickly shut down in your ability to have any influence in speaking into that conversation. So, again, that to me speaks to almost the disingenuousness of calling themselves a conversation. When you're not open to listening to people from all camps, that quickly shuts down the opportunity for conversation. So,
yes, sure does. How do Emergents view the Bible? Do they look at it as an objective truth?
Well, basically one of the key errors, in my opinion, with the Emergent Church is there is a denial of objective truth within the Emergent Church, and that has some significant implications for your view of Scripture. One of the things that's important for people to understand, there's always been, friendly, brotherly dialogue and debate between people within various Christian denominations and Christian theological positions. We've had friendly debates over the years between Calvinists and Arminians, amillennialists, postmillennialists, premillennialists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Baptists. We've had room for all kinds of theological debate, but it's generally been friendly and very brotherly. But the problem with the Emergent Church, as I see it, is that these conversations are basically impossible within the Emergent Church because in regards to these other groups, these conversations were possible and mutually respectful, even in our disagreements, because we all came to the table with a common understanding that the 66 books of the Bible are our final authority. But see, the reason we evangelicals are having a hard time engaging in any meaningful dialogue with the Emergent Church is because we tend not to find the same basic commitment to the final authority of Scripture. For example, my friend Doug Padgett has made the statement in numerous settings that, in his view, the Bible is simply another member of our community. And, when you get to the point where you're saying that the Bible is simply another member of our community, well then, what the Apostle Paul has to say is really no more valid than what Joe Blow has to say, sitting in the chair in the corner.
Take us to an Emergent Church service. Describe what someone would experience at this service. What would the decor look like? What would be the order of the service? How do they preach, etc.? Can you do that?